So I am going to obviously be reading from my book, From Ashes to Angels Dust, A Journey Through Womanhood. And just to tell you a little bit sort of about the book, it is a mixture of poetry like the poem you just heard, and short stories, first-person stories, and also interviews that I did with women of color. It also has the dynamics of domestic violence in here, prevention strategies that are going to be used, that are being used across the country, and hotlines, national hotlines, and things like that. So there's a lot in here. There's also healing techniques because I do healing work. So there's different healing techniques in here that you can do around visioning, forgiveness, and things like that. So there's a lot in here. Also safety planning information. And I usually don't do trigger warnings, but I know folks, use those things now. I say nobody ever gave me a trigger warning for just like being a Black woman. Help you. So yeah, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started. A little bit about the book. The Journey from Ashes to Angels Dust. I didn't begin my return from exile until about 10 years ago. I didn't even realize I'd been exiled until a blustery day in March. I was getting ready for work and wondered why was it so hard for me to stay happy. It wasn't a great time in my life, but it wasn't bad. I realized that even with all the yoga and meditation and affirmations I had to take, when I was younger, I really believed that anything was possible. I didn't believe it anymore. I started unraveling my past, and I'd done enough work on myself to know that the answer was somewhere in my psyche. I was born in the city of my mother's birth, a city she thought she'd live in forever, but in the 1970s, drugs were being pumped into the community, and I was 5. My father decided that we needed to move to the suburbs where it was safe. My town was safe. It could have even been called idyllic. We didn't have to lock our doors. My schools had the best of everything. It had a ski club. My classmates vacationed overseas. And I was being taught computer programming in the early 80s while my peers in the inner city didn't even have decent books. The only thing missing from my town was other people of color. There were no Black people in my neighborhood. I never had a Black teacher. In fact, there were no Black teachers in the entire school system. There were no Black librarians, no Black doctors. The only Black business owners I knew were in my family or friends of my family. And most of them didn't live in my town. And school wasn't much better. I was the only Black child in my grade from the first grade to the third. So I lived in a perpetual state, really, of schizophrenia. I had a lot of friends, but I was an outsider at the same time. I knew I was privileged, but I felt guilty about it. I hated being different, but I liked standing out. I stood out, but I was invisible. My academic and artistic talents went largely unnoticed, and my mother had to come to school on more than one occasion to straighten out some teacher for being slick at the mouth with me or overly punitive. Did I mention I was invisible? I was a chunky Black girl in a sea of thin white girls, so I never had a date. I was never asked to the prom or any dance for that matter. Interracial dating wasn't done then. And the Black guys that were bussed in from the nearby city labeled me an Oreo in between dating and chasing white girls. So my first real date was around age 18, and I was 20 before I had my first boyfriend. Now, people might argue that school is traumatic for many children. However, what I'm talking about is being treated as less valuable during the most formative years of a child's life. It was crippling to my spirit and mind to be treated with less value because of things I had no control over, like skin color, hair texture, and body type. I chose to attend a small private college not far from where I grew up, and that environment was not much better than my other experiences. The only change was that I started to realize that I was smart, and I was also becoming political. I decided to move to Atlanta in my 20s because I needed to experience Black success. I stopped wearing weaves and wore a short natural instead, and this was long before natural hair was widely accepted, which obviously further exasperated my dating dilemmas in the South. But I was determined to love everything people said was ugly about me. Then I decided to go back to school. I finally had teachers of different races. I became a total nerd. My intellect soared. One African American professor even referred to me as a scholar. It's no secret that I have a love-hate relationship with Atlanta. I moved there with all the trauma I experienced. I've lived in many different cities and traveled to several countries, and Atlanta is the only place that terrifies me. Every fear and icky thought I felt about myself was reflected back to me tenfold. It's where I came face to face with exile that blistery day in March, and where I started my return. I became an artist. I became a domestic violence advocate. I became a leader and a teacher. I became an author, public speaker, and poet. It's where I wrote the first draft of Ashes. It's where I learned to really manifest and where I got my heart smashed into a million pieces. It's the place where I fell in love with yoga and where my fibroids were conceived. It's where I became known as spiritual and where I lost my faith. I left Atlanta more than 10 years ago, while my life gets better with each passing year, I still have much work to do. I don't know how old I was when questions like, why am I not good enough? Why then not me? Why am I never chosen? Why does everyone leave me? And what's wrong with me? But I can tell you that I spent most of my life either being in relationships and situations that confirm those questions or trying to uproot them from deep in my psyche and feeling guilty when I wasn't successful. And I turned out to be my most prolific oppressor. Only now am I beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Only now am I able to see that my life is a collection of moments. Intellectually, I know there are things I cannot control. Intellectually, I know freedom comes from detachment and being okay with what is. And even though I'm still stumbling, I'm confident that returning from exile is possible. So this book, what's this book about, right? It actually began as a novel about 4 girlfriends and their relationships and their trials and tribulations. And in the first iteration, one of the fictional characters was in an abusive relationship. And before long, that particular character was dominating the whole story. So that's when I sort of started to think, man, there's something here about why am I so focused on this one character who's in a domestic violence relationship. Then one afternoon, I was in the library researching domestic violence, and everything stopped. My ideas, words, and vision disappeared. An insistent voice told me to tell the truth. I tried to ignore it, but the voice got louder. I didn't ignore it the second time, because it was the same voice that warned me about the man I dated 2 years prior. It was the voice that told me to quit my job and go into hiding when he began stalking me. This voice guided me to safety and helped me leave the state to begin a new life. Despite the advice of well-meaning friends and family, now the voice encouraged me to write a book about women and girls like me. I immediately began looking for women to interview. I contacted friends and family. I put flyers up in local coffee shops and bookstores, went to a support group for battered women, and presented my project. I didn't get an overwhelming response as the women were concerned about, obviously, their safety, their confidentiality, but many were willing to talk. I stepped up my outreach and eventually more women began to step forward. So each interview was different. Sometimes we met at their homes, sometimes I went to their homes. I met women who lived in shelters, at coffee shops, and libraries. I also conducted interviews by the phone. I received stories by email, fax, and snail mail from women around the country. We laughed together, shared experiences, rejoiced in our freedom, and sometimes cried together. All of the names and places associated with the interviews have been changed to ensure the confidentiality of the survivors in this project. You will also find many of my poems woven in between the stories. Poetry and journaling was and continues to be a huge part of my healing process. And I couldn't have found a better home for my most personal pieces. So thank you again for picking up this book and taking the journey. YWCA, the Creator makes a good work.
Ashe.
So, like I said, this book has all different kinds of stories in here. It's a mix of poetry and, as I said, essays that were sent in. And so I'm going to read. She's one of my favorite poets and writers. Her name is Romaine Washington. She actually lives here in LA. She was going to be here, but she had back surgery, and we've been friends for I don't even know how long, a really long time. And so the first piece I am going to read is a piece that she wrote called New Moon, Empty Sky by Romaine Washington. Tense as a nail, that lies next to Frank. Her hand crossed over her heart, ankles crossed, and her shoulders up to her ears. Frank sprawled out next to her. his arms outstretched, legs in a wide V shape, as if he stopped midway through a jumping jack. Between the wall and the tip of Frank's fingers, Beth has a sliver of bed to call her own. She lies on her back, coughing snug, listening to Frank snore so loud that he nearly drowns out the hourly chimes of the grandfather clock in the hallway. It's 3 in the morning. She has 2 more hours of teeth-grinding nightmares before the real fighting begins. There are no bruises, fractures, or signs of physical abuse. No broken bones, no holes punched into walls from fits of rage. There's no physical evidence, no physical scars, stabs from his murderous glare. The calm promise of death lingers. The silence and withdrawal he inflicts shrivels Beth into submission. She cannot take a picture of a bruised psyche or a videotape of the gaping wounds of his silent treatments. She tells herself what he tells her. She's too sensitive or emotional. Frank has words that hit Beth at gut level. He seems to have a sense for when her defenses are down. He delivers hard-hitting verbal jabs with the confidence and skill of a prize fighter, knows her weak spots and takes full advantage. Her eyes puffed shut from crying, stomach knotted, her head in a drunken fog, yet she has nothing to show for the pain. The physical symptoms dissipate over time, but the emotional wounds cripple. Misplaced anger, focus askew, Beth is losing as a worthy opponent. She is angrier with herself for being hurt than at the person dispensing the pain. On a weekly basis, she replays the history of their romance and marriage. During these memory replays, her mood swings from guilt to confusion to rage and accusation. Sometimes the memories press so hard into the present, she finds herself cursing at Frank, even though he's at work, miles away. She dreams of doing something Frankless tonight. Her relaxed smile turns into a snarl as she recalls the constant badgering and the way he slowly and methodically killed her social life. In his eyes, her friends were reprobate, and he made sure to drum his opinion into her as often as possible. She's too fat, too nosy, and wants to use you. She's a slut and has no respect. He's in love with you. She's too stupid. She thinks she's smarter than she is. She's in love with you. When Beth did have company, Frank would go out of his way to make sure they felt uncomfortable, a call to the bedroom or a talk. If you don't quit inviting her over, I'm going to strangle her. If all else failed, he would create a scene and kick them out. No internet access at home and no cell phone. He often forgot to deliver messages. Soon the home phone stopped ringing. Beth stares at the phone, recalling times she went out without Frank and how he quizzed her when she returned. He would complain about how lost he felt without her and how he desperately missed her. It started that way and gradually progressed to thoroughly physical fidelity inspections. Stripped down, he would check for bruises and sniff for unfamiliar scents. Sometimes Frank would make surprise appearances when she did go out. Now he promises to stalk her if she ever leaves. How did she get in so deep? She remembers how sorry she felt for Frank. He seemed so insecure. She felt that he needed steady doses of her, and in time, he would let his guard down and learn to trust. Initially, she didn't mind the surprise appearances or physical inspections. She had no desire to look at anybody else, because when Frank wanted to, he could be the epitome of charm. She recalls him standing before her with that boyish grin, holding one red rose and a card. In those moments, she felt like a warm candle lighting the room. Beth would nurture her red rose, placing it in a cool, bright spot in the room, watering and sniffing it daily, letting it rest in the bud vase until all the petals withered and littered the table. Soon the stem became a naked memory of his kindness. Surprise roses and candlelight dinners are only a memory, but with a full moon in the sky, there's hope that the honeymoon will wax. She thinks her love is just that strong and things will be different this time. He thinks his love is so strong that she will never leave. He admires his control over her. She dances the cha-cha, hums, and claps. At this moment, if you ask Beth, she would not remember the 10-mile walk home because she disagreed with him over tinsel in a store and someone overheard. She would not recall him threatening to throw boiling water on her because she asked what came in the mail. In her memory, the kettle stays on the stove and isn't turned on again when she leaves the room. Kisses make her forget the many times he raped her. She lives for those tender moments of roses and kisses the way junkies live for a fix. No more romance novels for Beth. She spends her spare time reading self-help books on abusive relationships. She's collected enough of them to open a specialty shop, run a shelter, or simply escape. She does not move, pack a suitcase, or drive away. She refuses to apply definitions to herself no matter how well they fit. She cannot be that dumb. Her self-esteem cannot be that low. After all, she's an educated woman from a good family with a mother and a father who are still married and who love each other very much. These nightmares belong to someone else. This is someone else's life, not hers. She questions herself often. Had she dreamed the intensity of his threats and the callousness of his actions? It used to be that Frank was kind 90% of the time and only slipped occasionally. The honeymoon periods grow shorter now. He is only a shadow of the man she fell in love with. Most times, Frank is someone to fear or avoid. The moon wanes into nothingness and empty sky. Beth's world is upside down as she drifts off to sleep. She can no longer hear her own breath. Frank comes to bed with a white rose and hands it to her. She kisses it and begins to pull the petals off one by one. He is buying time. She knows he is clutching a butcher knife in his hand, hidden behind his back. Beth plucks a petal and rubs it between her thumb and forefinger. She does not have a plan. She lies down. Frank kisses her. Tonight, they will sleep with the knife between them. Moon, empty sky. Resurrection. Our love, long dead, sleeps peacefully in coffin. I dig it up, sew on limb, stitch you together the best way I can. I stand back, admiring my masterpiece, waiting for a thank you, for acknowledgement of my creation. Something, waiting for you, a dead thing, to appreciate life. You devour, tear limb, rip out heart, show no mercy, and I lay at your feet, broken. You, still full from the conquest, with pieces of me dangling from your incisors, use me as toothpick and wonder, what did you expect from a monster? I write my pain on paper so I know it's real. Evidence, slamming against ideals, and truthfully, I don't know if any of us will ever heal. I take the blue pill and wait for the big reveal, but in the meantime, I crack. Against the wall of racism, I crack. Against sexism, I crack. Against colorism, I crack. I've got so many friends, but no one wants the real me. They want the Facebook me, the healer me, the expert me, the writer me, the artist me. But no one wants to hear about that. They want woman warriors that don't complain and can take a beating, but not too much. They want bad bitches that make good money, but that keep their bodies tight and like to fuck, but not too much. They don't want to know how we make over and make under, filtering ourselves thin because we're desperate to be visible, desperate to be loved. We be cracking, we are cracking, we are cracked, but no one ever sees it because we're black. So, I don't know if you all are familiar with Anne Sexton, but she is a pretty famous poet, and I didn't know about her, and she actually, quite a long time ago, I came upon her work, and I was like, how long is it called? I'm not familiar with this woman's writing, so I wrote a series of poems for Anne Sexton. So this is for Anne Sexton 1. And a lot of times poets, I don't know how many poets are in the room, but a lot of times poets, we get inspired and we want to write in the style of someone else. Mm-hmm. So this is sort of in the style of Anne Sexton, or at least the best I could do. For Anne Sexton 1. She is done and she is known. His familiar, she circles. She circles herself, circles the floor, circles him. He dresses and undresses her promise. Her insecurity comforts and is home to his selfishness. He dresses and undresses her dignity, leaves it laying in heap beside the bedpost. There are no secrets between them. like to get lost. But I want this to be very interactive. So I'm going to stop as I go to this next piece, which I think will be with you. So before we go on to here, and please. So, maybe about the topic. So, story. Yeah, not my voice yammering all the time, but also just I feel like I like being read to, and I do. I'm like a third grader. Okay, I'll start. When I was a little girl, my grandmother's house was like a castle. It was a Victorian-style home with many oddly shaped rooms. Because my parents worked, they would send me to my grandmother's house every summer. I spent most of my time either reading or playing in the backyard.
My grandmother's backyard was massive. They had huge trees and wildflowers that grew in all directions. It was my magical kingdom. My older cousins hated getting dirty, so I had the yard all to myself. It was just the ladybugs, frogs, and me. On hot days, I'd run through the sprinkler and then collapse on the dirt, letting the sun beat down on my drenched body.
After a while, I'd reluctantly return to the house damp and covered in dirt. Nighttime was the only time my cousins and I played together. We would play hide and seek, truth or dare, anything we weren't supposed to do. As soon as my grandmother went to bed, we'd go out and play.
My grandmother was not as strict as my parents were. Her main restriction was on laziness and boredom. I'm from a traditional West Indian family that firmly believed that idle hands were the devil's playground. Laziness was a trait she would not tolerate and was reason enough for a swat across the legs. In her eyes, children had no reason to be bored, ever. If she caught us lying around, she would find something for us to do. There were always dishes to wash, rooms to clean, or books to read. That was another good reason for me to stay outside.
Physically, my grandmother was a very attractive woman. People who met her could not believe she had 12 children and 16 grandchildren because she had such a youthful glow. She had jet black hair that she wore in a tight bun. At night, she would let it down, and I would brush it out for her. It was long and soft. She was a big-boned woman who was effortlessly gentle until she wasn't. Her dark eyes were often steady, and they seemed laser-like when she regaled me with stories about growing up in Jamaica. Her stories were not for my entertainment. They always had some moral that related back to the necessity of being an obedient child. She'd talk/lecture me for hours while I braided her thick hair. Still, our ritual was the one chore I didn't mind.
Most of my relatives lived very close or visited her often. The house was never empty. Food was always on the stove with grandmother standing over it. She didn't drink, but everyone else in the house did. Liquor was a constant in my family. The adults could always count on getting a drink, a meal, and good conversation. There were many nights that I'd sneak out of bed, sit at the top of the stairs, and listen to the grown-ups. I loved listening to their loud voices, debating, arguing, and making fun of one another, often drowning out both the television and stereo. At times, it was difficult to know if they were arguing or joking.
One of my favorite people in that house was Uncle Tony. He was different from my other relatives. I could talk to him. No matter what the question, he would answer it honestly. Like my grandmother, my other relatives believed that children should be seen and not heard. He wasn't like that. I thought my uncle knew everything. He'd been to places I'd never even heard of.
He and my Aunt Angel lived with my grandmother for as long as I could remember. In almost all of their pictures, there were exotic women flocked around him. His pictures portrayed a confident young man, tall and muscular with a smooth dark complexion and dark curly hair. I guess he would have been considered attractive in his day. As long as I can remember, he'd been old and wrinkled. The only remnant of the young man in the pictures was the mischievous wrinkle that never left his eyes.
I was 7 years old the first time he fondled me. It was a typical day. It was summer. The adults were in the kitchen laughing and enjoying each other, like they always did. He called me in his room. We'd often play checkers or dominoes, which we played to the death. He never let me win. He said it was not good for children, especially women, to get special treatment. I raced up the stairs like I always did. When I got in the room, the board was not in its usual place. I asked him where it was, and he told me it was under the bed. I remember his fingers frantically tugging at my shorts. They were my favorite shorts. They were blue, with a white stripe down the side. Blue has always been my favorite color. They were tight, but I loved them so much. I maneuvered myself around and looked at him as he pulled me toward him and clamped his hand over my mouth. I was a chunky kid. Shorts were tight. He was having a hard time getting his fingers in. I didn't know what was happening. I can't remember if I knew it was wrong. I can't remember if I wanted to get away. I just remember him saying, shh, in that raspy voice of his. I remember he was almost smiling. One of his hands stayed on my mouth while he penetrated me with the other. After it was over, I went back downstairs. Everyone was still there. The party hadn't skipped a beat.
I didn't remember anything until my niece. All the painful memories flooded in on me on an ordinary day. I was driving home, nothing major. Then all of a sudden, I remembered. I never told my family. I knew they believed me, but I didn't think they could handle it. So like so many other things, I kept it to myself until today.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, honey. Yeah. So that's a tough one, right?
Yeah.
It's a tough one. And, people who have bought the book, friends of mine, after they read it, they'll text me or I'll have conversations with them and they'll just be like, man, that was like heavy, like your book is really heavy. And I'm like, really? But I think it's because I've been doing the work so long that, you can get kind of like jaded or used to the stories and things like that. So, yeah, but it's heavy, but it's real, right? So, do we feel like, because I want y'all to take care of yourself, so do you feel like you need to get food, get up and do that? If you need drinks, anything, it's all there. But I'm going to just keep it rolling. For Anne 2. And somewhere in bone, I know I am settling. And he knows I know I'm settling. He could never be you of perfectly pink lip, arms firm, and confident hands that held me tight once, dropping me like laundry. And I wonder why he stays, how he stomachs transgressions and lies that ooze, as if I could tell him I'm thinking of you, that I only think of you, that it doesn't matter that you don't even see me, that I've grown anorexic waiting for scraps on your table. How that would level him. My truth would slice him like knife into warm butter, and he would be forced to eat it. And he would know then that he must leave me then, and it would only be right for him to leave me at altar and sojourn off to excavate his dignity tucked neatly beneath our bed linens. He belongs to the world of the mundane, but you are poem alive, sand slipping through memory while I pretend to homemake. And you, all sun-kissed and unattached, breathe in, amused at my shame, convinced that monogamy is impossible. He is meat and potato. You are white teeth dangerous. I am loosely moral, and he is settling for the both of us. For Anne too. So I'm going to read this story of Stacy. And Stacy is sort of a compilation of different stories of different survivors over time. So this is a sort of fictional story. It's one of the only fictional stories in here, but it's not, because it's, there's grains of truth in all this story, right? Stacy. My mother, Stacy, entered the world in the fall of 1941. She was an outgoing little girl who never feared anyone or anything. She had a good family. Her father was a car dealer, and her mother a nurse. Her parents did not drink or smoke, and everyone attended church regularly. For as long as Stacy could remember, she wanted to be a teacher, but she was also very political. Growing up in the 1960s, my mother saw Black people go through many trials and tribulations. Even though she had plenty to eat each night, she knew there were many that were less fortunate. Stacy decided early on that she would make a difference. Sitting on the sidelines was not her style. When offered a scholarship to a prestigious college in California, she readily accepted. She was more than happy to move away. She loved her family, but was anxious about starting a new life. In school, her classmates labeled her a brain, but she also knew how to have fun. She went to all the parties and dances and never lost focus. She was at a meeting for a political group on campus when she met Ainsley Stenson. He asked her out for a date, but she turned him down, as she did every other guy on campus. Instead of leaving her alone, he pursued her vigorously for months. Finally, she relented and met him at a coffee shop on campus. To her surprise, she had a good time with him. Ainsley was very good looking and didn't mind spending money on her. They were inseparable after the first date and quickly became the campus couple. Stacy was smart, but Ainsley was brilliant. Like her, he shared a passion for politics, and they would often debate. Despite their common interest in politics, Stacy and Ainsley were like night and day. She sported a short natural and was athletic with round, hard hips from years of African dance. She was a vegetarian with an even temperament. Ainsley, on the other hand, loved red meat and ice cream. He barely exercised over her. Being big was his advantage, and he used it. He had a deep voice, and when he got angry, his green eyes seemed to change colors. He rarely lost an argument. It was no surprise that he'd chosen law as a profession. He also came from a family with money. My mother's family was middle class. Nevertheless, they found one another fascinating. Naturally, people on campus were jealous of the dynamic duo. People said Ainsley was overcompensating for his near-white skin. They said Stacy was a social climber. The gossip only made the couple grow stronger. After a year, Stacy felt it was time for her family to meet. Stacy felt it was time for her to meet his family. Ainsley warned her that his family had some issues with skin color. My mother was furious that he hadn't told her sooner. He said he'd been too embarrassed. My mother had no idea that my grandmother was speechless when she saw my mother's picture. She also didn't know that the more my grandmother protested, the more my dad lavished love and attention on her. That was his nature. Ainsley controlled all his relationships. It wasn't long before Ainsley asked Stacy to marry him. She said no. She wanted to meet his family first. Every day she received flowers and plenty of gifts. Her friends thought he was pushy. She enjoyed the attention. 6 months later, he asked her again. She said no again, and he decided to take her home. His parents almost fainted when the chocolate girl with the afro hopped out of their son's Mercedes. Stacy bounded right up to them and said, "What's happening?" Stacy. And so the way this story is set up is there's narrative, and then there's also sort of the voice of the daughter that's telling the story, and the voice of Stacy. So this is Stacy. I wasn't trying to make any type of impression on them, negative or positive. I know I came from a good, honest family. I came home, I was smart, and I had earned my place in school. No one could take that from me. My mother could charm the pants off anyone if she wanted. She was a wonderful person. By the end of the dinner, my mother and grandmother were talking like sorority sisters. Emboldened by the meeting, my mother decided to accept his proposal. Stacy soon found out that Ainsley was not the revolutionary she thought he was. He'd gone to the meetings, but didn't have the heart to do the work. He was more for fraternity parties and protests. Stacy accompanied him to the parties, and ironically, this was when trouble began. To his surprise, his friends began to accept Stacy, and suddenly, everything he used to cherish in her became the focal point of ridicule. The first act of violence came during a wedding discussion. He suggested she get rid of her natural hairstyle, and she said no. He told her he was tired of her attitude, and she told him to get used to it. He slapped her across the face. Stacy slapped him back. He hit her again, and she picked up and hit him back. She called off the wedding and refused to see him. Eventually, he pursued her into believing it was stress, and the wedding went on as planned. The couple married in his hometown, but continued living in California. And that's where I'm going to stop with that story. You're going to have to get the book to see what happens with Stacy and Ainsley. Plus, that's a long story. It's a long one. Danger, been working. Emmett Till, Hawkins, John Bell, Oscar Grant, Huey P. Newton, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King. Danger, been working. Judy Garland, Campbell, James Byrd, Trayvon Martin. Strange fruit no longer swings on southern vines, it rots on city plots. All across the U.S., all across us. Victor Steen, Ronald Madison, Travars McGill, Timothy Strawberry, dangerous black men, walking and doing and being so dangerously black and perfect for target practice. Don't wear hoodies, don't sag your pants, don't put hands in pockets, don't take hands off steering wheel, don't reach for keys or identification, don't forget that you're black. Wendell Allen, Marley Graham, James Brissett, Orlando Barlow, Gardner, Michael Brown, Renisha Bride, Tamir Rice, Ray, all unarmed, but clearly up to some shit. Don't be confrontational, don't look him in the eye, don't be an off-duty police officer, don't ask for questions, don't make quick movements, don't move slow, don't move fast, don't be poor, don't be rich, in fact, just don't be. Danger working. First fruits for Oscar Grant. Like you, I could be warm as winter blanket or cold as bottom of police officer's boot. Moments ago I was young, life of party, music, possibility. In a moment I became leader, lover, symbol. For a moment brief, I was flesh, body, air, breath, bone, and blood. Sun on sin was real, was father, son, not dealer, thug, or criminal. Every life, kiss tiny body, kiss toes, tuck tiny body into bed, make promises. Like you, I wanted to taste life fully instead of concrete, intermingling with blood. Some said that I was asking for it, that I was foolish, thinking I could escape the noose, could shake loose history and shackle, that I dared to be more than statistic, more than dead nigga on the news, dead nigga on the dirt road, dead nigga on city street, dead nigga on the wrong side of the wrong police officer barrel. Like you, I wanted so little. Wanted to see first steps, second, and then third. Seeping out the pavement on filthy subway station. Like you, I deserve to feel like kindness instead of spirit separated from body in filthy subway station. Someone will say without saying, and sometimes will say that I was asking for it, that I caused my own death just by being here. Some will write books, and movies, and maybe even profit just a little from my death. They will dig me up and trot me out in the name of justice and injustice, and after a while, everyone will forget that I was ever real. The between. I'm your dirty secret. Your secret, Jane. We got no foundation. We lived on ground and Andrea is shaky. We started at the bottom and we stayed here. In the between. I'm your dirty secret. Your concubine. Your breath on your neck leaves me breathless. I stay plugged into your matrix, watching you go makes me hope less. I'm your dirty secret escape. Who can't keep up? Who can't keep up with you? In the between. I am falling. I can't stand. You're coming and going in and out of of lives, in and out of love. This ride is making me dizzy. You come and take and go and carry bits and parcels and pieces of me to others. You come and go and carry and leave bits and parcels and pieces of me, of others, and me, leaving me stuck with you and them in aura, with nothing but memories squatting in brain matter, accomplishments twisting in the fabric of your dream catcher, hanging on interchangeable fragments of your passions collected in the between. So this is called No Names, and so I go to a writers group in New York where I live, and they give us prompts and we sort of write from the prompts. And so in one of the meetings, they said that back in the day, to get arrested, they would publish mug sheets in the newspaper with their crimes. So this just No Names. Cal and Laura Green, her stout, 46 years of age, him, well built, 5'11", 198 pounds. The place, Philadelphia, the year, 1963. Crimes, gambling, while black. Not enough to be arrested for actually doing nothing. Not enough to be hauled in for trying to put a little money in his pocket. Not enough to be locked up for loitering, gambling, breathing while black. No, insult is added to injury. Mrs. D is published for the world to see. Laura, you're looking like who did it and ran after, like she intended to be out for a second when she looked out of bed, realized she ate bread and ran out of the house. Like, what the fuck? Kept bits and parcels and pieces of me, of others, and me, leaving me stuck with you and them in aura, with nothing but memories squatting in brain matter, accomplishments twisting in the fabric of your dream catcher, hanging on interchangeable fragments of your passions collected in the between. So this is called No Names, and so I go to a writers group in New York where I live, and they give us prompts and we sort of write from the prompts. And so in one of the meetings, they said that back in the day, to get arrested, they would publish mug sheets in the newspaper with their crimes. So this just No Names. Cal and Laura Green, her stout, 46 years of age, him, well built, 5'11", 198 pounds. The place, Philadelphia, the year, 1963. Crimes, gambling, while black. Not enough to be arrested for actually doing nothing. Not enough to be hauled in for trying to put a little money in his pocket. Not enough to be locked up for loitering, gambling, breathing while black. No, insult is added to injury. Mrs. D is published for the world to see. Laura, you're looking like who did it and ran after, like she intended to be out for a second when she looked out of bed, realized she ate bread and ran out